We are thrilled that you have joined this important conversation convened by the Coalition for Adolescent Girls, known as the CAG, which is a global coalition of over 80 organizations working with and for adolescent girls globally, and hosted at Population Council's Girl Center. We are convening these events with our partner Akili Dada, an African women-led leadership incubator which nurtures the next generation of women leaders. My name is Evelyn Carijo, one of the co-chairs of the CAG and associate director at the Girl Center. I'm joined by my co-chair, Tashrifa Silai, who will moderate today's discussions alongside Flora Mushiri of Akili Dada. The theme today is sustaining progress, investing in adolescent girls amidst global challenges. This discussion is coming at a pivotal moment. We are witnessing funding freezes and policy shifts that are disrupting every sector. The implications go far beyond budget lines. They threaten to reverse hard-won progress on adolescent girls' well-being. Even more worrying is the precedent these funding shifts may set, potentially signaling to other funders and governments that the needs and rights of adolescent girls can be deprioritized. We should not let this happen. That's why we are here, not simply to react, but to reimagine, not to speak about girls, but to work with them and for them. The purpose of this roundtable is therefore to reaffirm our shared commitments to the rights and well-being of adolescent girls and share strategic approaches to sustain and strengthen investments for girls. The conversation doesn't end here. This is the first of a series of discussions that the CAG, Akili Dada, and other partners will host. We will develop knowledge documents and collaborate on joint statements to call for sustainable funding for adolescent girls. In today's discussion, we will get insights on current funding trends, hear from girls on what they want for the future, and learn from two panel conversations with thought leaders from across the globe. A quick reminder that the Q&A function on the chat is open. Feel free to share your questions and reflections throughout the webinar, and we'll address them after both panel discussions. For those who'd like to join the CAG and be part of our knowledge sharing efforts, our website and link will be shared on the chat. To help us ground today's discussions in data, we'll start with a brief presentation on trends in the bilateral donor landscape as relates to investments for adolescent girls. I'd like to welcome Sylvia Guglielmi. Sylvia is currently a researcher at the Gender and Adolescence Global Evidence Gauge program at ODI Global. She specializes in gender, adolescence, and mixed methods and evaluation research with a focus on vulnerable young people, and has a keen interest in multi-sectoral and holistic programming for adolescent girls. Welcome, Sylvia. Flora, you can share the slides.
Thank you very much, Evelyn, and hello, everyone. Thank you also to the Coalition of Adolescent Girls and Akili Dada and the host of partners making this event possible and inviting me today to speak on our research investing in adolescent girls, trends in the bilateral donor landscape, conducted by the Gender and Adolescence Global Evidence Gauge program, with support and partnership of the Adolescent Girls Investment Plan. Next slide, please. So we know that efficient and effective allocation of funding for programs supporting girls is truly critical for progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and increasingly, as the SDGs rapidly come to a close, and for the post-SDG agenda. Because of the critical window of adolescence, we know that investments for and with girls can yield exponentially greater results in both the near and long term, indeed impacting girls immediately, so during their adolescence, but also impacting their adult life and the life of any children which they may have. However, and this was really the impetus between Gage and Egypt to launch this research series, we do note a historical opacity as to how funds, and particularly official development assistance, so ODA, which will be the focus of this presentation, are allocated to girls, has really hindered insights into monitoring the efficacy of funding and for accountability as well. So this presentation builds on previous iterations of this investigation into ODA funds, which we conducted between 2016 and 2022. And this presentation looks at the most recent data from 2023. Next slide, please. So very quickly, a note on the methodology we adopted. So we reviewed data from the OECD's creditor reporting system and selected the top 10 bilateral gender equality donors and explored data across low and middle income country contexts. We selected official development assistance, or ODA, with gender equality tags as both principal and significant objectives. So we included both gender principal and gender significant markers. We then truly sifted through the data set by using keyword searches for adolescent specific programming, because there is no adolescent marker in the OECD credit reporting system dataset. Additionally, and to better situate the trend analysis in the current context, we also conducted a rapid review of ODA funding fallout and projection data from 2024 and 2025. Next slide. So what have we found? You can hopefully see on your screens a bar chart which shows that the amount of gender and adolescent targeted ODA, so the dollar amount in billions represented by the green bars on your screens, has increased over the last 8 years. However, there is a concerning trend shown by the orange trend line, which is that 2023 marked the 4th consecutive year in which ODA that was flowing to adolescent girls declined as a percentage of overall ODA for those countries, which really signifies a deprioritization of adolescent girls in relation to other target populations. Next slide. When looking at the top 10 gender equality donors over time, we see that investments in adolescent girls vary greatly. You can see the data from 2021 in orange, the orange lines per each country. In red is 2022 data, and the most recently published 2023 data is in purple. So we can see that the most recent trends show that the United States' funding increased significantly in 2023, while the UK's continued to fall and France dropped significantly. So this trend analysis really suggests that there are regional and global shifts and political shifts in funding prioritizations that we are still understanding and must continue to monitor. Next slide. And this slide here shows the variation on the percentage of gender and adolescent ODA out of those individual donors' total ODA. So this represents that adolescent girls are truly high investment priorities in a few select countries, particularly in Canada, in Sweden and Norway. With Canada, these are all 2023 data points, with Canada demonstrating an over 25% of its ODA tagged for adolescent girl programming. Next slide. And very quickly here, we, as I mentioned in the methodology slide, we include in our analysis both gender principal and gender significant markers. Gender principal tags for advancement of where programs are advancing gender equality as the primary objective of that investment. And gender significant tags are for programs that are expected to make a significant contribution to gender equality, but is not the prime. We include both, but in this graph, we disaggregate ODA with gender principal tagging And we can see that this has fluctuated quite significantly, but did remain steady between 2022 and 2023. Next slide. In terms of who and where, who is the recipient in both countries and institutions for the top 10 gender equality donors ODA, we also see major shifts. In 2023, Nigeria, Tanzania, Mozambique, Ethiopia, and Jordan were the top 5 countries receiving this ODA, compared to Indonesia, Tanzania, and Lebanon in 2022. We also see shifts in recipient institutions. In 2023, NGOs and CSOs, followed by multilaterals, followed by public sector institutions, were the primary recipients of bilateral ODA. Next slide, please. We also are very interested in girls in all their diversity and do cross-cutting intersectional analysis with the data set. On this slide, we show the amount of gender and adolescent ODA reaching young people with disabilities. And we see it as very, very small in proportion to the number of young people with disabilities, which is estimated at 13% and even higher in conflict-affected regions. And though it did increase substantially in 2022, you can see the spike on the screen, it did plummet back down in 2023 to pre-COVID levels. Finally, we also specifically look at funding and ODA funding that is flowing to youth-led organizations. And we see that this more than doubled between 2021 and 2023, although this must be viewed with caution because it did start at a very, very low baseline. However, we see that the proportion of funding for youth-led organizations out of the already marginal pot of gender and adolescent ODA did increase from around 1% in 2021 to 2.6% in 2023. Next slide. So very quickly, because of the time lag between the OECD's publishing of the ODA datasets, we did look at some preliminary analysis and forecasting. And the OECD does state that international aid is set to fell in 2024 by over 7% in real terms compared to 23. And this was marked the first drop after 5 years of consecutive growth. And the fall in ODA was due primarily to a reduction in contributions to international organizations, as well as a decrease in aid in the Ukraine and lower levels of humanitarian aid. Sorry, I should say that this is the total pot of ODA. This is no longer our analysis, which disaggregates by gender and adolescent age. And also simulations of ODA in 2025 show that ODA is estimated to drop between 9 and 17% further. So very troubling trends from 2024 and 2025. Last slide. Next slide. Very quickly here to show that we have also previously done quite specific deep dives into individual donors ODA. So when we conducted this research looking specifically at previous UK cuts to ODA, we do note that funding for gender and adolescent programming face significantly higher cuts than the reduction to the overall aid budget, particularly humanitarian aid programming for girls, girls' education programming, and access to sexual and reproductive health seem to have disproportionate cuts when compared to in the context of general cuts to ODA. So within these times, what are our key recommendations? In the current context, we see that assisting young people in all their diversity, including increasingly through innovative funding partnerships, which hopefully will be discussed in today's webinar, as well as deploying strategies that are informed by robust research evidence so as to maximize the scarcity of resources, will be really critical to ensure gains for girls are not lost. Secondly, work with donors to increase funding that targets adolescents with disabilities, as well as supporting other intersecting needs, such as those of migrants, child brides, and refugees. We feel it's important to continue monitoring gender and adolescent targeted ODA for youth-led organizations, including core support, so to develop capacities to access a broader set of funding channels. Fourthly, to garner support and advocacy around the development of an adolescent-specific marker. As I say, we did this manually through the database, but we really urge the OECD to develop an adolescent-specific age marker. And finally, to continue to invest in research to monitor investments to adolescent girls, increase donor accountability, and indeed explore increasingly a wider pool of emerging donors. Over from me, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. Very powerful trends, powerful recommendations, and really reinforcing why we need to increase our evidence generation, our advocacy efforts, and strengthen investments in adolescent girls. To our audience, we will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so keep your comments and questions. Now we bring you a brief but powerful segment by adolescent girls on the future we want. 4 young leaders from Turkey, Uganda, and Tanzania will share their reflections and that of other girls on the future they envision for adolescent girls worldwide. Flora, you can put up the slides. Over to Denise.
Hello, first of all, I am Deniz Yıldız. I am from Turkey, and I'm an active member of Sune's Daughters Girl Advisory Team. And so my statement is that the future I want for girls is that they can become educated. They can become self-sufficient adult women who can make decisions about their lives and also help other girls do the same. And so I will be giving it to Lemza.
Okay. Hello, I'm Lemza from Tanzania. I am 26 years old. I'm here on behalf of other girls about the future they want. I want a future where girls are not dependent on their families due to economic exploitation and lack of access to financial. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Maren. I am an active member at Sune's Daughters Girl Advisory Team member. In the future, I dream of girls can walk down the street without looking back. Their dreams are not called nonsense. They are not confined to their houses. They are not compared to boys. They do not tug on their dresses just because they are stared at. They are not deprived of playgrounds because they feel unsafe. Thank you. I will pass it to Shakira.
Thank you. This is Nakaoza Shakira from Uganda. I am 24 years, and the future I would want to see a future that supports girls to remain in school in order to prevent unwanted pregnancies. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you for those powerful quotes. The statements made by the girls today aren't just slogans. They're backed by evidence, lived experiences, and the dreams of many girls who are ready to lead. And now we move on to the next segment, which will be the panel conversations. I hand over to our panel moderators for the day, Tashrifa Silai and Flora Mushiri. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. My name is Tashrifa Silai. I work at BRAC as a senior manager for advocacy and policy. And as already mentioned by Evelyn, we do co-chair the Coalition for Adolescent Girls together. Thank you to all the incredible girls for powerfully voicing the future that you want. Your words have set a powerful tone for today, a future that is bold, inclusive, and driven by the voices of girls everywhere. With that inspiration in mind, we now turn to our panel discussions where we'll hear from a range of experts and change makers who are working to make that future a reality. So for this first panel, we are going to focus on exploring evolving funding trends and best practices in philanthropy for adolescent girls, assess accountability mechanism within donor strategies, and elevate grassroots and youth-led perspective on sustainable and equitable resource mobilization, ultimately identifying actionable recommendations to ensure continued community-driven investment in adolescent girls amid global funding uncertainties. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome the panelists, an incredible group of thought leaders and practitioners driving bold, equity-centered change in the funding landscape. First, we have Valeria Montúfar, Program Advisor at Girls First Fund based in Guatemala, with a background in political science and gender-responsive development. Valeria brings a wealth of experience in supporting community-led responses to child marriage and GBV. She's going to speak on funding trends and the importance of accountability to the communities we serve. We are also joined by Stacy Akinyi, the founder and executive director of Great Ladies Organization in Kenya. Stacy is a young feminist, an advocate for sexual reproductive health and GBV prevention. She will share the realities grassroots organizations face when seeking funding, offer key recommendations to donors and partners, and spotlight innovative girl-driven models for community-based resource mobilization. Next, we'll have Dr. Victor Mugambi from the Global Fund for Children. Victor is a powerful voice for equitable philanthropy. As part of Global Fund for Children influencing team, he collaborates with grassroots organizations and young leaders to promote flexible community-led funding models that shift power and advance social justice. Today, he will share insights into funding trends, approaches, and best practices within the broader philanthropic landscape. Finally, we'll have Iman Lakbachi, Director of Network Engagement and International Youth Alliance for Family Planning and a globally recognized youth advocate. Iman brings deep expertise at the intersection of youth leadership, digital health, and gender justice. She will share learnings from the We Trust Youth accountability mechanism and highlight how funders can scale similar models to ensure girls and young people are not just beneficiaries, but co-creators and decision makers. Please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to our incredible panelists. We are grateful for your time, your leadership, and your commitment to adolescent girls. Let's dive in, starting with Valeria. Valeria, what emerging trends are you seeing in how donors are prioritizing or deprioritizing funding for adolescent girls in Latin America, and how might these trends influence long-term investment strategies? And from your experience at Global First Fund, what mechanisms or practices have proven most effective in ensuring funders remain accountable to the communities and girls they aim to support? Thank you and welcome, Valeria. Valeria.
Hello, I'm so sorry, just had a problem, a technical problem. Hi everyone, thank you so much for creating this space. It's really nice to be here and share with all of you. Thank you so much for those questions, Tashifa. I think that a key reference for analyzing investment in adolescents is the Gender and Adolescence Global Evidence Report that since 2020 showed that only 5% of official development assistance to low and middle income countries was directed toward adolescents and youth. And the report also highlights that within this group, some populations, such as girls with disabilities, face even greater barriers to accessing resources. In recent years, there has been growing interest in supporting initiatives that center adolescent girls as active agents and essential protagonists in driving social change. This approach emphasized the need for sustaining accompaniment and support throughout the life cycle, particularly during childhood and adolescence, which are critical windows for transforming gender norms and expanding opportunities that have historically been denied or limited, shaping girls' future. Investing in adolescents represents an strategic opportunity to positively alter their life trajectories, demanding a clear commitment to long-term investments. However, in Latin America, economic and political factors often steer resources toward emergency responses or immediate concerns at the expense of prevention and sustained development. While there is growing conversations in many spaces about the importance of funding adolescent girls, either through community-based organizations or directly, this dialogue hasn't yet translated into real investment. It highlights an ongoing gap between talk and action and underscores the challenge of turning interest and dialogue into concrete funding commitments. Within this context, expanding support both for adolescent-focused programs and youth-led organization is a complementary and necessary strategy. Nonetheless, the Adolescent Girls Investment Plan report from 2021, developed also by Gender and Adolescents in partnership with Plan International, shows that unlike other sectors, areas like preventing child marriage and in early union funding has declined. And finally, interventions that adopt holistic perspectives, such as gender transformative approach, require us to rethink both the timing and nature of investments, since transforming deeply rooted cultural norms takes time, patience, and sustaining commitment to achieve effective and lasting change. These trends highlight the urgent need to reorient investment strategies toward sustained long-term commitments and not only acknowledge the complexity of adolescents, but also center girls as key agents of social transformation. About the second question, this question ties closely to the Girls Center approach we promote at Girls First Fund, which seeks to implement mechanisms and best practices that ensure meaningful and active participation of adolescent girls at every stage of program cycles, from design through implementation and feedback. Among the most effective practices are participatory methodologies that seek to consult and amplify girls' voices, as well as strategies to engage families to strengthen community legitimacy. Concrete examples include youth council, sharing results of the programs and activities with the communities, and the documentation of testimonials in various formats that help make the impact visible and amplify it. Our Funding Plus model also incorporates technical support, networking opportunities, and advocacy, with an emphasis on fostering transparency and accountability. This translates into comprehensive support that combines financial grants with mentorship and direct communication channels between the Girls First Fund team and adolescent leaders involved in supported programs. For instance, we organize spaces where girls can connect with each other and with funders, strengthening shared responsibility and an open dialogue. Our role also involves constantly reflecting on how we can better support organizations. A concrete example of this commitment to listening and learning after several years of collaboration was the development of midterm report. Its purpose was to understand how partner organizations perceive their collaborative relationship with Girls First Fund. The central question guiding the process was, how does Girls First Funding Plus model support community-based organization in ending child marriage and early unions and advancing gender justice? The findings reaffirmed the importance of flexible funding and the value of building partnerships grounded in long-term commitment rather than fear or uncertainty. This approach is essential for sustaining the change we collectively aim to achieve. This approach is also linked to community leadership, which emphasizes local roots and ongoing communication with key actors to involve them as active participants in social change process. Finally, at Girl First Fund, we value learning as a dynamic and continued process that requires active listening, ongoing collaboration, and collective reflection, essential elements to continuously improve the quality, relevance, and sustainability of interventions. In conclusion, for us, effective accountability requires building genuine, ongoing relationships with communities and girls where their voices are heard and translating into real decisions, ensuring that investments generate authentic and sustainable impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Valeria, for those valuable insights into donor trends and the importance of accountability to girls and their communities. For the next panel, we are going to shift our focus to grassroots level perspective, where I'm going to welcome Stacy Akinyi. Stacy, grassroots organizations like yours often face unique challenges when navigating donor landscapes. From your experience, what are the main barriers these organizations encounter when seeking funding, and what key recommendations would you offer to donors and partners to better support and fund grassroots girl-led initiatives? Secondly, in addition to traditional funding routes, you've also explored innovative community-driven resource mobilization approaches. Could you kindly share examples of these alternative strategies and how they've empowered girls and young women in your context? Thank you so much, and karibu, Stacy.
Okay, I hope you can get me so that I can continue.
Yes, we can get you loud and clear, Stacy.
It's okay. Thank you, Tashrifa, for that. I bring expertise from grassroots organization because I've just witnessed the both incredible work that we women at the grassroots are doing. But despite the work that we are doing, we are facing a lot of challenges when we are navigating the funding landscape, or rather when we are seeking for funding. First and foremost, at times the application process for funding is cumbersome and tiresome at times, and the reporting mechanisms, it's a lot, more so for grassroots organization, because at grassroots organization, most of the people that we work with are voluntary based, and maybe at times we lack the expertise. So most donors are built around complex proposal and report writing requirements. For small community-led groups, especially for the ones for these girls, it becomes a barrier due to limited administrative capacity and just technical expertise. And also there's also an issue of lack of trust or recognition. For us as grassroots organization, most of the time, you can find it, we cannot be trusted with a large sum of money for us to handle. But when you come to the community, or rather, we are doing much impact at our communities. So at times we are told that maybe if you have never handled such a specific amount of money, you as a grassroots organizations, you are not allowed to handle such a specific amount of money. Just a moment. Can I go on? Or you lost me again?
We can hear you, Stacy. Kindly go ahead.
So as I've just mentioned that most of the application process for us as a grassroots organization, at times it becomes tiresome for us to just work on it. And the reporting mechanism at times is tiresome because at times we lack the expertise that we need. And as I've mentioned also, there is lack of trust in maybe some grassroots organization because most of the grants or rather the funds that come along the way, most of it they need for you to have been in operation for so many years for you to have there are certain requirements that you need to have audited reports. And for us at grassroots organization, maybe some of us are just starting out these organizations. So it's hard for us to have all the requirements that the donors need. And also we are having issues with short-term funding. Most of the time when we are seeking funding, we get short-term funding rather than just having long-term funding. So we implement a program, then we have to stop. We have again to seek for funding, and we lack maybe enough resources to pay our own staff that we work with. So most of the time, you find the staff that we work with will have to leave, and we cannot retain them. So, and also we are having just barriers in accessing these application funding. For instance, people who are at grassroots organizations, for them just to access this funding, it can become tiresome, maybe due to internet issues, or rather there are some people who prefer having storytelling rather than just having a lot to write on. So these are some of the challenges that we face at times when we are seeking for funding at grassroots organization. So what I would recommend is for donors to co-create these funding policies or other practices with a young feminist organization or just women-led organizations. And when we co-create these funding practices together, we are able to know whether we are into it and how best can we support. And for donors also just to have trust in young women or rather grassroots organizations that are implementing adolescent programming. Apart from that, we need flexible and long-term funding that can sustain our different programs for a very long period of time, rather than just having a funding that is short-term, a period of maybe 6 months or rather 1 year. Then grassroots organization will have again to look into how best they can get another funding. And apart from that, we need just to build trust in these people. And apart from that, and just trusting a young feminist organization would do, and they can reduce the reporting. I know accountability is key, but at times there are grassroots organizations that are not aware on how best they can go through funding. So reducing maybe the application process of funding, because at times it takes a lot of process, and just incorporating diversified funding rather than just funding a specific program. We can just incorporate like a diverse funding program or other mechanism so that we can explore. So we also at Great Ladies Organization, we have explored different innovative funding mechanism despite the donor shifting. At Great Ladies, we have an aspect of economic empowerment. We have an aspect of economic empowerment where we do beadwork, crocheting, and sock making to empower women financially. After we have empowered them financially, through the profits that we get, we're able just to sustain our programs. And also we work through partnerships with different organizations that provide us with the technical expertise, and also they provide us with different materials that we need. And also, of course, our community is our main support system. And through the community that we work with, we have built a trust in our community, and building this trust in our community has enabled the community just to give us different materials that we need whenever we are having an event. They can also do in-kind donation to us. Apart from that, we do crowdfunding, whereby we invite members of the community. We also hold just safe spaces where people can pledge and commit to what they have. So these are some of the recommendations that we can make to donors. And apart from that, we need just to do more of partnership collaboration with different stakeholders and who are engaged in adolescent programming. So we need to work together, we need to trust each other. And apart from that, we need capacity building because, for instance, grassroots organizations, as I mentioned earlier, they are not much built on maybe grant writing, we are lacking the resource and expertise. So we need organization development system strengthening to be done maybe with the stakeholders who are much aware of their grant writing techniques or other steps that we are supposed to take. And I believe when we do this, we are able just to continue sustaining the adolescent program, because as we all know right now, maybe there are some programs that we at Great Ladies were implementing maybe through the USAID and it was cut off. So it is still a backlash to us, or how are we going to step back? Because a lot of adolescent programming, like look at Dreams, they were being supported by USAID, but right now the funding has been cut, and now we are losing adolescent girls that we were supporting. So despite us losing the funding from USAID, we still need to add more money to adolescent programming, because I believe young women organizations that are supporting adolescent programming are doing a lot of work. And when adolescent girls are not sustained, adolescent programmings are not sustained well, we are at the verge of losing our community, because even statistics show that in maybe in a country, it's women who are many and girls are many compared to boys. So we need to invest in the future of these girls right now early, and we need just to brainstorm how best we can sustain the adolescent programming that we have.
Thank you, Stacy, for grounding us in the realities and resilience of grassroots girl-led initiatives. Your insights into both the challenges and creative solutions are incredibly powerful. To build on this conversation, I would want us to turn to a donor perspective. So I'd like to welcome Victor to share his reflections on current funding trends and how donors are shifting their approaches, particularly in ways that center community-led and youth-driven solutions. So Victor, drawing from your work, what are some of the key funding trends and shifts you're observing within the broader philanthropy landscape, particularly in relation to adolescent girls? And can you share examples of innovative or promising philanthropic approaches that successfully centering community-led and youth-driven solutions? And what lessons can other donors draw from these practices?
Thank you, Tashrifa, and thank you, Stacy, for highlighting those challenges that are actually the real picture of what happens in communities. And a lot of times we don't consider what happens in communities. It's usually a very top-down model in terms of how we conduct development work. And these are some of the practices that we are trying to challenge. And if we really we are doing philanthropy in a genuine way, in the way that it's supposed to be, it's really about the communities that we serve and the change that we want to see. And so I want to ground this conversation in what is happening at the moment. I think there are a lot of shifts happening. There are political shifts. There is war in areas like Ukraine. There are other emergencies of other funding cuts that have been cut left, right, and center. Governments are cutting down their funds and minimizing the amount of money they give. And also historically, most of the parts of the global majority are actually disadvantaged when it comes to development work and philanthropy. And so at the end of the day, the subjects who suffer in this kind of philanthropic environment, it's actually the adolescent girls and children and young people and the other communities that we serve when we are trying to do this work. But of course, there are other positive things that have happened. So due to emergencies, I think philanthropy is starting to realize that we are actually doing it the wrong way. And organizations are starting to step up, increasing their giving, the amount of giving they are going to give to different regions globally. I think there's also some organizations also increasing their endowments and the amounts of money that they are going to also put out there to the global majority. Of course, there are also organizations that are moving, both institutional funders, individual funders who are moving to flexible funding. And so flexible funding by supporting, giving organizations funds that are actually unrestricted, giving flexible funds that actually support co-support, give co-support to some of these organizations in these grassroots organizations. And then there's also supporting directly the evolving needs of adolescents and young people, which is actually the main thing that we should be doing, because by restricting the funds in the way that philanthropy is right now, it actually doesn't respond to the immediate needs that happen. You have seen emergencies, adolescents have emerging needs, evolving needs. There are different generations that come with different needs. And so philanthropy should actually speak to the moment and respond to the current issues, and not actually use the model that you have used throughout in the lifetimes, And then there's also power shifting to communities. I think a lot of organizations are starting to see that we actually need to shift power to communities, because if we talk about this work, we're actually serving the communities, and we're trying to promote change in communities and actually catalyzing the work that these communities do. And so I think funders are starting to recognize that funding must flow directly to grassroots organizations and not mostly through intermediaries, though intermediaries also have their role within the ecosystem. But funders are starting to realize that this money must actually get to these communities in unrestricted ways, and it actually needs to serve the women, adolescents, and young people themselves, who are actually the ones who are weaved inside these communities. The other thing we are also seeing is a lot of youth-led leadership within grant making and funding decisions. I mean, funders are starting to realize that adolescent girls are not what we call quote unquote beneficiaries, but they are leaders in their own right, and they actually understand what they need. They understand the needs that they have better, and funding models are starting now to include things like youth advisory councils. But then the other important thing is to consider, if you actually want to involve these young people and adolescents in decision making, we need to make their participation very meaningful, in a way that we need to give them decision making power for them to understand how they are contributing to the change that we want to see in communities. Going to the next question on what needs to be done, basically, I think philanthropy needs, based on what is happening and the injustice that we see and a lot of problems in this world that we live in, I think it's a time and it's a wake-up call to actually start asking ourselves critical questions on how we have been conducting business on a day-to-day basis. And I think we need to look at even the most basic things, like when we talk about interrogating the terminology we use. We have actually adopted terms like beneficiaries. It has become a very important, it has become a term that we all agree with, whereas communities are not actually beneficiaries, but they are partners who we partner. And I'm using the term partner intentionally because a partner is someone who you mutually benefit from each other. It's not a top-down or a power kind of relationship, and it's someone who we are both benefiting from each other, and everyone comes with something they are contributing in what you are doing. And so interrogating some of these terminologies that we use, beneficiaries, implementers, grantee, stakeholders, which are terms that are actually perpetuating justice, I think it's one of the basic things, and the many other basic things that we need to think about. The other thing I think is looking at how do we make more of our grant making participatory and actually involving those who matter the most in decision making in grant making. I think that's also an important aspect, and I've seen a lot of organizations are actually involving adolescent girls, young people in making decision and actually participating in the process to also make them understand why are we doing this, and why do we also need to make decisions of this funding that comes to us to cater to the needs that we have in the areas that we are. I think the other thing is to approaching risk. I think funders, the biggest question in giving grants in a way that is progressive is about risk and accountability. And this is a big question, and a lot of times we are seeing funders hesitating because they're asking, what is the value for money that we get when we give this grant? We can give a grant to an organization and it disappears with this grant, And I think approaching risk in a different perspective and understanding that actually this is a mutual relationship and partnership. And so relationships are built. It's not something that you come in one day and you say, I want you to do this, but it's a relationship that we actually build together over time. And so with these relationships, you're able to approach risk in a different perspective and trying to look at risks in different ways. The metrics that we use for our, what we call monitoring, quote unquote, and evaluation instead of learning. These are some of the things that we really need to look at, and how we approach risk and accountability itself, and what we actually mean by when we talk about accountability. The other thing about accountability is who is accountable to who. I think we all have a duty to be accountable to communities, and the partners also who work with communities have a duty to be accountable to communities, and these communities are actually adolescent girls and children. And so we really need to think about the accountability and what we are talking about when we mean who is accountable to who, and that kind of relationship. The other thing I think is holistic funding. I think this model of funding a specific thing and restricting ourselves, we are saying we are funding economic empowerment, we are funding health, we are funding education, and the emergencies that are coming up actually are really holistic. Different sectors are now affected one way or another. And when we have one lens of looking at the problems that communities have, it actually brings a lot of problems in how we conduct business, because I think communities have challenges that are very interconnected. It's health, it's education, it's gender, it's so many issues, it's climate. And so we really need to think about how do we fund holistic, and how do we have holistic approaches in the way we give our grants and do our grant making. The other thing is considering long-term relationships. I think, for instance, if I was a funder who was funding an organization for 8 years or 10 years or 20 years, maybe, it would be, that would actually cushion them from an emergency that would occur from another funder who cuts that kind of fund. And so we really need to prioritize long-term relationships when it comes to funding, and we need to understand that relationships take time. It's not something that is easy. We need to benefit from each other mutually and build that kind of relationship long term, and look at that in a long term perspective when we fund organizations and vice versa. And so I think it's really important to center all these approaches in the way we conduct business, because this is just the beginning of the challenges that we're experiencing when working with communities, and in future probably worse challenges could come, and it's the right opportune time to look at how we fund organizations and how we actually conduct development work, which is actually initially supposed to be a friendly way of giving assistance to each other as humans the way we are supposed to. And so this is the right time to actually look at this and try to have a different approach in how we do things and moving forward. Thanks so much, Tashrifa.
Thank you, Victor, for those very thoughtful reflections and on how philanthropy is evolving. It's clear that meaningful impact starts with centering those closest to the issue. Continuing on that theme, let's now hear from Iman Lakbachi, who has been leading important work on youth-led accountability. Iman, what have been some key learnings so far from building a youth-led accountability mechanism like We Trust Youth? What practical steps can funders and partners take to replicate and scale youth-led accountability models like You Trust Youth across different contexts, especially to ensure meaningful participation and power sharing with adolescent girls?
Thank you so much, Tashrifa, for the invitation and for those really thoughtful questions. As mentioned before, my name is Iman Lekbashi, and I'm here today representing the International Youth Alliance for Family Planning, or IYFP, one of the co-leads of the We Trust Youth initiative, which is a youth-led initiative focused on shifting power and accountability in global development and philanthropy. So I'll start by speaking a little bit about what we've learned so far from building We Trust Youth, and then move into what that means in practice, especially in terms of what funders and partners can actually do to support, scale, and replicate this kind of work, and particularly when it comes to centering young people and adults and girls. So first, when we talk about accountability, we often default to thinking about how young people need to prove that they are trustworthy or capable. But what we've seen and what We Trust Youth is trying to disrupt is that accountability and trust need to go both ways. So this initiative emerged because so many youth-led organizations, especially those led by adults and girls or working in under-resourced regions, were being asked to deliver, to report, and perform, but rarely had the power to question or give feedback to the funders and systems that shape their work. Another key learning is that good funding is about how, not just how much. Through We Trust Youth, we've seen firsthand that the way funding is provided can determine whether a grant feels empowering or extractive. For youth-led groups navigating tight timelines, unpaid labor, academic pressures, or caregiving responsibilities, process is everything. Good funding practices remove barriers and create breathing room. They look like flexible timelines, recognizing that youth are often juggling multiple roles and responsibilities at the same time, simplified applications and reporting, so time isn't lost on administrative hurdles and people can actually spend more time on the ground doing the actual work, transparent communication where funders share their own constraints, invite feedback, and treat grantees as partners, not just recipients, and core funding, not just project-specific support, so youth organizers can actually pay staff to work on those projects, cover things like internet, transport, and plan long-term. Our third key learning is that accountability is often associated with exposing what's broken. And while it is crucial to name harmful practices, we've learned that transformation also requires hope, inspiration, and proof that better is possible. So in our work with youth-led groups, one of the most energizing insights has been how deeply motivating it is to see examples of funders getting it right, whether it's a donor who offered unrestricted multi-year support with minimal reporting requirements, or one who stayed in dialogue with grantees during a crisis and shifted timelines without penalty. These stories offer more than feel-good anecdotes, but they serve as living blueprints for what trust-based, equity-centered philanthropy can look like. Highlighting positive practices also encourages other funders to reflect, to learn, to improve, and it shifts the narrative from calling out to inviting a wider ecosystem of funders into a journey of shared learning and accountability. We've also found that youth-led organizations are eager to participate in this kind of positive storytelling. Recognition matters, not just to donors, but also to the young people whose work was made easier, more impactful, or more sustainable because of those good funding practices. It restores dignity and agency to communities that are often treated as passive recipients instead of co-creators. And last but not least is accountability must be safe. The fourth thing we've learned is about safety and protection. So a lot of youth-led organizations have expressed fear and around giving honest feedback about a specific donor or funder. So there's this unspoken sense that being too critical might put your funding at risk. So we make sure that the tools we build allow for anonymous input, and we prioritize building trust in the process. Now, what does this mean for funders and partners, and what can they do to replicate and scale youth-led accountability models like this, especially to ensure meaningful participation and power sharing with adults and girls? So I want to break this down into 4 practical steps, but before I get to those, I just want to pause and acknowledge something about the current landscape. So right now, with the shrinking civic space and increasing funding restrictions globally, we're in a moment where donors are being forced to rethink how resources are allocated. There's just less funding available, especially for grassroots and youth-led work. And that makes it even more critical to ensure that the money that is out there goes as far as possible and has the biggest impact. And it's with this lens that youth-led accountability mechanisms like We Trust Youth become not just nice to have, but absolutely essential. These models help make sure that the little funding available is actually used in the best way possible, transparently, efficiently, and in alignment with the actual priorities and needs of youth-led organizations. So now moving on to some practical steps for funders. First, shifts from consultation to co-creation and co-ownership. This is probably the biggest one. Too often, youth are brought in at the very end to validate what's already been decided. But if we want real accountability and participation, young people, especially adults and girls, need to be in the room from day one. That means being part of setting the agenda, shaping evaluation frameworks, and deciding how success is defined in the first place. Second, fund youth-led groups properly. And I cannot stress this enough. Unrestricted, flexible, long-term funding is non-negotiable. You cannot expect youth-led organizations to assess funders, to push for accountability, or even safely give feedback if they are constantly worried about surviving the next funding cycle. Power sharing starts with financial stability for these youth-led organizations. Third, use what already exists. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Models like We Trust Youth are already up and running, and we're actively learning, improving, and open to collaboration. Funders can pilot our tools with their grantees, integrate the assessment question into their existing evaluations, or even work alongside us to co-develop new models based on our framework. And fourth, intersectionality is crucial. When we say we want to center adults and girls, we need to acknowledge that not all girls have the same access to spaces like this one. If funders want to reach those most affected by exclusion, girls in rural areas, those with disabilities, LGBTQI+ youth, then that means resourcing things like translation, community-based storytelling, offline access in different forms of participation. One size won't fit all, but the principles that guide your work, like trust, like equity, like flexibility, are the things that matter the most. In conclusion, we're very excited to be launching these new tools this year. These were designed not just as a one-off product, but as something that can evolve and adapt and be used by both youth-led organizations and funders to strengthen mutual accountability. So as we continue building and testing this mechanism, we're also looking forward to learning with others who care deeply about shifting power and making funding more effective and accountable, especially for adults and girls and youth-led movements. And as you'll see on the slide, our contact information and website are up. So if this resonates with you or sparks ideas for collaboration and shared learning, would really welcome the opportunity to connect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Iman. And thank you all for such rich and engaging conversation today, from funding trends in philanthropy to youth-led accountability mechanisms. The insights shared have not only deepened our understanding on the current funding landscape, but also reminded us of the urgent need to keep adolescent girls at the center of our efforts. To our panelists, Victor, Valerie, Stacy, and Iman, your experiences, reflections, and recommendations have been incredibly valuable. Thank you for generously sharing your knowledge and the critical work you continue to do in your respective spaces. Thank you so much for the time and the contribution to this dialogue. Your presence is a powerful testament of the shared commitment we hold to sustain progress and ensure adolescent girls are prioritized even amidst global challenges. Before I say bye, I would like to mention that we'll have a question and answer segment that my colleague Wamboi from Akili Dada will moderate. I invite all participants to share on the question and answer section of the chat any questions, reflections, recommendations they might have for the panelists in relation to today's discussion. We'll read them after the second panel. But then again, you also have an option of raising your hand right now if you have any specific question to the panelists. We'll take note of your details and call on you during the question and answer session. We look forward to hearing your thoughts and reflection. You can also email your questions to cagsteeringcommittee@gmail.com and we'll be sure to respond. We look forward to hearing your thoughts and continuing this important conversation together. Thank you again, the first panel. And now let's warmly welcome our next panel to continue with this important conversation. Flora, I'd like to hand over the mic to you.
Thank you so much, Tashrifa, and everyone from the first panel. Excuse me. Welcome everyone to the second panel session, focusing on equitable and holistic funding, centering adolescent girls, priorities on sustainable impact. This panel brings together thought leaders and practitioners who will share strategies, models, and best practices for ensuring funding approaches are more inclusive, accountable, and truly centered around the needs and voices of adolescent girls. Joining us today are Ruth Graham-Golder, who is a senior advisor on gender equality at UNICEF, responsible for leading UNICEF's work on adolescent girls, well-being and leadership, which includes leading 2 flagship initiatives, Power for Girls and Skills for Girls, in collaboration with many other partners. Ruth is a passionate and committed feminist leader with a keen interest in fragile and conflict-affected contexts and a strong belief in the power of the people to come together to make change. Also joining us is Esther Okech, the Executive Director and Programs Coordinator of Kenya Female Advisory Organization, KEFIADO. She's an avid researcher on gender, diversity, and social inclusion with published research work on the programs she has worked in. Intersectional and intergenerational framing have seen her work on gender, diversity, and social inclusion by working with women and girls with disability in and out of school through sports and art for change to build agency and power. She has engaged in transformative feminist leadership through spaces, feminist transformative leadership spaces through intersectional movement building at the community level. Esther is a passionate, focused, and purposed African feminist and stalwart human rights defender. Also joining us, Aminata, the head of partnership and resource generation at Purposeful. She's a feminist and adolescent girls program specialist and a dedicated advocate for gender justice. At Purposeful, Aminata plays a pivotal role in mobilizing resources and fostering partnerships that fuel the work of youth-led movements. She co-led the resourcing resistance team at Purposeful, focusing on moving flexible resources globally for girls and gender-expansive youth, ensuring that those most impacted by inequality can access the tools that they need to create change. Aminata is passionate about bridging the gap between philanthropy and youth and young people lived experiences. And my name is Flora Moshiri. I'm the communications and advocacy lead at Akili Dada, and I'll be moderating this session. And I cannot wait to hear the fantastic insights that the panelists have. We'll start with Ruth. Ruth, the Learning Circle, which you convene at UNICEF, has been pivotal in convening funders from different perspectives on adolescent girls. What are some of the strategies that the Learning Circle have employed so far to mobilize resources and promote follow-through on policy promises, particularly in the support of adolescent girls? While speaking to that, could you also share insights on how collaborative models like the Learning Circle and partnerships with Purposeful, who are here with us, help promote more equitable decision-making processes that center funding around girls' priorities and support holistic cross-sectoral investments? Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you so much, Flora, and a huge thank you to the organisers for convening this really important conversation. I think, you know, it's easy somehow to get disconnected from the reality that adolescent girls' rights were already in a very stark, grave situation before we've seen this upheaval in the funding landscape. So just, I want to acknowledge and say thank you so much for making the time to bring together all of these different leaders, and really looking forward to the Q&A. Maybe a couple of things just to say about the Learning Circle and to underline, yes, it's something that's co-convened together by Purposeful and UNICEF, and it's essentially a small private group of source funders, individuals within institutions that are very different from bilateral governments to philanthropic organizations who want to see better and more resources for adolescent girls coming from international development. So that's kind of what the Learning Circle is. It started about 2 years ago, so it predates the crisis, but it's still a very young convening. And you asked about kind of key strategies. So here are a few that I think, things that we're trying, things that we're learning to share and reflect on. I think the first thing that we have tried to do is to very intentionally step outside of our comfort zone, our groups of institutions that think in the same way. And that's part of the reason why it's been so special. And I've learned personally so much from partnering deeply with an organization like Purposeful. You know, Purposeful and UNICEF hold very different perspectives, institutions, networks, processes, breadth of mandate, all of these different things. And I think that is part of the strength of a partnership like the one that we have, that is rooted in feminist friendship and trust and challenge and sometimes disagreement. Like, that is productive, and it helps us, I think, to create a space and bring, with our different networks as well, different people into the room. And we need more of that, I think, as a strategy and as a community. There are too many spaces where it is all friends who already agree, who already have the same talking points, the same data at their fingertips, the same perspectives, the same solutions. So I think that's kind of strategy one. I do think there is a risk that we get stuck as soon as we go to public spaces in a kind of gridlock dialogue where institutions just say, yes, we agree it matters. Yes, we're funding X million, name drop a few specific organizations, name drop a few specific institutions. We agree it matters. And then leave the conversation. And that doesn't reflect the fact that maybe that commitment is 1%, 2%, 4%, whatever of their institution's portfolio. It doesn't reflect the quality of what that funding looks like. I think is really powerful what other speakers have said about that importance of girls being at the decision-making table, funds going directly to grassroots movements and so on. And so part of that, I think, is really important. So getting out of that gridlock of the generic exchange, I think, is a key strategy. And the way that we have done that with the Learning Circle is to create this private space and to get very real and very specific about, okay, we've got this amazing, powerful data, which I use all the time, Sylvia and the Gage team, about the mapping of ODA and the percentage that is going to adolescent girls. We've got a lot of information around what works for girls' movements, the kinds of funding, what is stopping us. For source funders around the table, what are the kinds of issues? And I think there are three clusters of issues that they've really highlighted. One is political. There's a reason why a very small percentage of that funding is going to adolescent girls. Very big picture, it's that it's not seen as big a political priority as defence, as economic growth, as for the sort of ODA spenders, domestic funding, domestic issues. Girls and children more broadly cannot vote in the vast majority of contexts and scenarios, so they're not sitting on the boards, and so I think that is a real thing that we have to contend with. There are massive political barriers to adolescent girls as a constituency being reflected in funding. Okay, so that's an issue we need to figure out. How do we offer solutions to that? The second cluster is technical. There are a lot of institutions who are just not set up, whether it's the bureaucracy, it's the risk appetite, it's the number of staff they have to process the paperwork to fund certain kinds of organizations in certain kinds of ways. We can wish it was different. We could work for years to try and reform that. Those are strategies. But in the short term, it's not feasible for them to do certain kinds of funding. So what are the technical solutions to that? And the third is structural. And again, I think picking up on what some others have said, I think adolescent girls' issues and what we know works are not just sat in one sector. It's not you just fund education and the problem is solved. These are a deep set of structural issues that cut across girls' lives, and we need a comprehensive approach to that. And the best evidence shows that giving girl advocates, girl networks, girl movements flexible funding so they can work on the issues that are very diverse and intersecting, that is an important strategy. And when it comes to building programs and services, multi-sectoral models are what works. So okay, you want to deliver the HPV vaccine, but you're going to be doing that most likely in a community centre, a health clinic or a school. That might be the one opportunity to reach that girl with health services based on the current infrastructure. So layering something onto that so that the girl gets access to more health services is a cost-effective and powerful model. But our structures just aren't designed in that way. So that's kind of the three big clusters of things that we've learned. We've got to figure out concrete strategies for addressing that. And that's kind of where I think the Learning Circle has got very exciting, I think we can say, on behalf of the group, and certainly on behalf of the partnership of Purposeful and UNICEF. Part of what we have been trying to do is to respond to some of these concrete challenges as a group. So, okay, we don't have enough concrete, robust population level data that's accessible that shows why we need to focus on adolescent girls. So supporting and working with the research community on better investment cases that speak to why that's a smart investment for growth, and why it's a smart investment to support girls' movements in terms of long-term democracy, in terms of it's a prerequisite for delivering on the SDGs. So there's a kind of data evidence strand, synthesizing what we know about the power of girls' movements. We know it from history, but we also need, for some donors, some extra evidence that helps to make that case. So working with some experts, including in this room, on syntheses of what we know about the impact of supporting girls' movements alongside the amazing and powerful case studies, of which we have many. And then finally, I think with some of these technical issues, we know that there are a plethora of different funding mechanisms out there to get money to girls, but they're not always accessible or feasible for all donors. And so one of the things we've been working on together is co-creating a new mechanism which uses the existing ecosystem to get more grants directly to girls organising, girls movements, girls networks. And that is directly through the kinds of modalities that Purposeful already houses. So for example, the Global Resilience Fund, and also direct support to funding program solutions at scale. So things like scaling up those health services, scaling up education and skills programs that are girl-centered and that respond to gender inequality. So we have designed this new Power for Girls mechanism. You can fund it through 2 different doors. It's just one mechanism that we're offering as part of an ecosystem that we believe deserves to be funded and to flourish. And it gives that sort of, what do you feel like, a floor, not a ceiling, a minimum amount that will automatically go to girls' movements. And it's being designed with and for girls at each stage, and both from a girls' advisory group in UNICEF and through Purposeful's girl-centered advisory mechanisms. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, a few of the key strategies that we have been attempting to craft and shape and push forward together. I do just want to say a huge thank you to, I don't know who's in the room, I can't see, but partners like Wellspring, Iceland, Germany, and others who've really come on board to help support the crafting of that, and you know, institutions, but particularly friends within institutions who seek to advance this agenda. We need each other, we need these informal alliances, and we need this kind of feminist friendship. And that certainly for me is part of the biggest strategy for advancing this work. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you so much for sharing some of the strategies that UNICEF is using to redefine funding, such as like the Learning Circle with Purposeful, which actually just showcases how it's possible to define decision-making focused on girls' priorities, and also just including multi-sectoral investments, just cutting across traditional silos. So thank you so much. And to our audience, I know we do not have the chat function or the Q&A app, but please do take note of your questions. And like my colleague shared, please do email the questions at cag@gmail.com. And we'll also be having a Q&A section at the very end where you could just also have a moment to articulate your questions to our panelists. And next we'll have Esther. Esther, through the powerful work you do over at Kefiado, could you share examples of successful holistic investment models that have improved outcomes for girls? And how can this be scaled or adapted in different contexts? What are the key challenges, recommendations, and opportunities you've observed in promoting integrated investments across education, health, and gender equality sectors for adolescent girls? And also, finally, what are the implications of the global trends, such as the Stop to Work order from the USA? And how can we navigate service delivery at the community level? Does this trend disadvantage girls and increase their vulnerability to GBV? Over to you, Esther.
Thank you very much. One of the things is that based on what everybody is saying today, is that we are all experiencing similar challenges, but also the opportunities which then exist whilst we are in such a challenging landscape are also there. So part of it is that when we're looking at frameworks which work, is that, for example, we know that there is a feminist macroeconomic model, which then looks at how funding on feminist work, which includes the work of the adolescent girls, can be centered at the community level, but particularly at the household level. Because within the household level, then you look at the needs which are intersectional at that household level. And this particular engagement then ensures that the needs are then utilized to then work on developing frameworks for funding, even by government. Because when you look at this household model, then you look at the areas in which then, whilst at an institutional level, we are able to look at what are the needs, then we are able to co-create with that particular household what is it that they require. And then when with that what they require, that is when we are able to talk about gender responsive budgeting. So when we talk about gender responsive budgeting, how then do we then ensure that when we are engaging on gender responsive budgeting, which looks at how public resources can be invested So when we're saying that shrinking resources, government is increasing their budgets, for example, in Kenya. So when we're looking at the gender responsive budgeting, how much of that particular budget is actually then being invested in adolescent girls? What we are looking at is that when you look at the gender responsive budget and looking at the issues of the markers, which then we talked about, those gender principles, we are even challenging the status quo where products which then are supposed to ease participation of girls in their normal lives are now being taxed. So part of it is that when we are looking at all these particular engagements, it is important for us to start engaging in a process where, as we speak about the issues of all these markers, we look at how then public expenditure should be used to influence how girls can participate, at different levels. So when we're talking about our the markers, for example, we are saying that our work in schools, for example, is that schools are supposed to be spaces where girls can learn to thrive. But in those particular schools, you still find that there's so many restrictions on how you're supposed to look like, how you're supposed to dress, how you're supposed to participate in different spaces, which then it means that we are not investing in the models which then can engage. So we need to look at how then models which look at play, for example, so that when you're young as an adolescent girl, you're able to play and understand the context of where you come from at that particular level, and that you should not be restricted in terms of your engagement, because one, as you grow and you are having your bodily changes, then you're restricted that you can only do certain things at a certain time. So we're looking at models which then from the household, we go into the communities where then they have to engage in, which is in institutions of learning. So within the institutions of learning, we must have spaces where then gender responsive budgeting is invested in those particular schools to respond to the needs of girls whilst they're in learning institutions where they spend much of their time. Shockingly, for example, we find that even in that particular investment, there's a school in Kenya which got, I think, 76 shillings. How is 76 Kenya shillings, which is less than $1, going to be able to engage in participative processes where girls, whilst they're learning about their formal education system, then how then are they going to be able to participate holistically when government is not even investing in their particular spaces? One of the things which then has already worked also is modeling where communities also participate in processes which then can holistically look at the sexual reproductive health needs of girls. And one of these things is that we've looked at the pad bank, that within those particular spaces, that how do we then ensure that when we are dealing with things which then can exclude girls from participating, like periods. So we have just celebrated the World the Menstrual Hygiene Management Day. But how many of those particular girls actually got access to a whole packet? And then in terms of the quality of that particular packet, and then in terms of the sustainability of that one packet, which then we are supposed to be utilizing. So one of the things which then works is to ensure that they are able to engage in getting even things like pad banks, which then you can have dignity whilst you're engaging at a different level. So in terms of when you're accessing commodities, which then you require, you're able to get those commodities at a different level. I've heard about the issues of financing for girls. And one of the things when you're talking about financing, it is also important to rephrase the way the financing frameworks work. There is work which has been done by, for example, Purposeful for Girls, which then looks at how then girls themselves can manage their own resources. So teaching girls from the financing models on how then the resources which you get even within your households, how to manage those financing frameworks, so that then this money which then comes to you is also something which then we want to look at. Whilst we look at all this that we are talking about, we still have so many challenges. The challenge is that in terms of access to services, in terms of access to resources, those are things which we face. But emerging challenges, which then are also emerging, are the issues of GBV, and particularly femicide, which is targeting adolescent girls. So when you're looking at safety, in terms of the communities where they come from, in terms of their households, so we look at even within schools, we have challenges of where even girls have been killed by their own teachers. So where are girls safe? So when you look at the issues which we're looking at, even on safety and security, what are the safeguarding models which then we need to have within institutions, within households, and within communities, which then will ensure that girls are able to engage at different levels. And when we look at how then we are supposed to be able to frame our thinking, we look at how, when we talk about the issues of leadership, when we are looking at the issues of leadership for girls, and when we look at the leadership of girls and sustained leadership at different levels, we have spaces where at community level, we speak about leadership development. But when we speak about leadership development, how do we sustain that transitional space where intergenerational leadership development can be had, and that we are able to have these girls transit at the different levels? This then is important to then engage, so that then we have spaces whilst you are having challenges, you have opportunities to transform. And then these spaces should be very intersectional. So when you look at the issues of intersectionality, where we look at the different issues of classism, we look at the issues of racism, we look at the radical thinking on how people think about our own curriculums, on how girls then can engage at different levels. This then will ensure that as we look at these challenges which they face, then there's also a shift of radical feminism, and looking at how then these feminist thoughts can also be engaged, so that girls can also learn about their own agency, how to act on their agency, about their own power, so that when we are challenging ourselves, we have the spaces which give them opportunities to work on the power within, and then give power to themselves to work with others. And this should not be done only at a different level, where perpetually, as people say, there is the same people you see in different meetings. How do we then ensure at the community level that these opportunities to engage are financed holistically and are sustained? So in terms of the financing and in the terms of the sustainability, how do we then ensure that leadership building is then taken at that particular level to ensure that there's continuous engagement at different levels? But whilst we are doing all this, one of the things which then we look at is that there's an opportunity for us to start thinking about self-care and the issues of mental health and mental health well-being. When we're looking at the well-being for girls, the high level which is rising of adolescent girls who are even committing suicide is alarming. So in terms of even our research, one of the research is that as we're looking at the holistic way of even investment, what are we looking at, how then we want to invest in these particular girls, and the opportunities for us to invest on issues of self-care at community level, on the issues of engaging, on the issues of well-being and mental health investment, so that when a child is facing challenges, the mental health systems are able to address the needs of children within health facilities and finance those particular spaces. But the challenge which we are having is that the gag rule and then the issues of the global trend has affected how then those services are going to be received. Because one, where there's privacy in when you wanted to engage at different levels, it means that now you have to get into a process where you're getting into, if it's a health facility, is now in an open platform where now many people have dropped off of services which then were offered in health facilities, for example. So it means that as we are looking at spaces which were safe for girls to be able to engage in, those safe spaces no longer exist. And that means that the dropout level is then becoming a challenge. Previously, people talked about the issues of care and treatment for even girls who are on HIV treatment. And one of the things is that their mental well-being is challenged because at this particular level, when you're going to access services, those services are no longer as available because of the stop work order. Whilst the county governments and national governments are saying that they are investing in ensuring that resources are there, we are still waiting to see the level of investment which can match the investment which was there at a different level. So the vulnerability which then this increases for girls is that whilst there were institutions who could probably have a pad bank, they are no longer there. So the risk of you having gender-based violence, where you are having unintended pregnancies, which was alluded to earlier by one of the young women, it is at a risk of increase. And while there were programs which then would be able to ensure that you had dignity and protection services at a different level, it means that these ones have reduced significantly, and that there are other challenges which then these adolescent girls face. So as we look at the opportunities which we can see, there's still light at the end of the tunnel, because we can also still think about how then, apart from looking for funding outside, we need to look at how then we need to have domestic funding, so that then within at the different country levels, ask politicians who we vote for on how own source revenue can also go to fund girls at different levels and the needs of girls at different levels. We need to be out there questioning on why there's no investment in ensuring that adolescent girls are able to be free from femicide, and that leaders at that particular level engage. So it is possible for us to do something different, but we have to push back to ensure that this can be done holistically. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Esther. I think you really brought to light what exactly the Stop to Work order has done at the community level, and also the need for more gender responsive budgeting, not only by our governments, but also by international aid. So thank you so much for those insights. I do acknowledge that we are at time, but I do ask for those who are still with us, give us a little bit more time, as we've got one more panelist, as well as a thrilling question and answer session that we anticipate. So I'll bring in Aminata, our final panelist. Aminata, the work at Purposeful that you do has been successful in moving flexible resources globally to girls. How have you seen girl-led grant-making models empower adolescent girls to have equitable decision-making power over funding priorities? And what are some of the examples of these models in action? And finally, what strategies have proven effective in holding governments and funders accountable to their commitments? And how can community-led and domestic funding approaches contribute to more sustainable funding investments for adolescent girls?
Thank you so much. I'll try to rush so I don't keep people waiting. At Purposeful, we really value and center the leadership, the expertise of girls, young women as well, because we all recognize that they're the most marginalized from decision-making, from power. We know and we acknowledge that money is power, and as a tool of power, we should move money directly into the hands of women and of girls, of young women and of girls, to make decisions over that. You cannot talk about empowering programs, projects, initiatives, or really centering the leadership of adolescent girls, of young women, if you're not talking about putting money directly into their hands. And you would not be true really to that process if you just say, oh, come, just for the sake of it, to tick the box. So what we have done and the models that we have seen really work is actually starting with girls. Start by listening more to young women, to girls, because they understand their communities, they understand their context. This is their lived reality. They know better, and the more philanthropy listens to girls, the better our approach and strategies to supporting their lived experiences, their innovation, and their power. So we really start by listening and then having a participatory process. It's not a process that comes to them when decisions are made. It's a process of let's listen what is possible. And after listening, putting money on the table and say, this is money, tell us what we can do. We have seen this work a lot, where girls are deciding priorities on what needs to be funded, because we all know resources are scarce. The previous panel spoke quite lengthily about scarcity of resource for girls' work and girls organizing globally. So when we have those scarcity of resources, we really need to be very concrete on where we allocate these resources. So young women have been able to really guide through participatory processes, deeply rooted in communal accountability, because sometimes philanthropy are really scared to trust girls and young women with money. but they're forgetting that young women are controlling resources in their families, controlling resources in their communities, and philanthropy to trust them will be a step that favors philanthropy in general. So we have seen how they've been able to really be accountable to each other, to be very cautious about how they allocate resources because they are also aware of the limitation to their power and to their experiences. So at Purposeful, another model that has worked is our advisory panel that brings young people together to make decisions. It's rooted in participatory process, it's rooted in trust, and in celebrating the autonomous power of young women and girls. Mostly I have heard philanthropy talk about risk, and also our work is really rooted in trust. We have reiterated multiple times that if you can trust other partners in moving money through them to reach girls, why not trust girls directly? We have tested models, tested infrastructure, and our work at Purposeful is really strengthening infrastructure to ensure that young women can directly access resources. Sometimes funders will tell you, well, we don't know how, we really want to do it, but our infrastructure, our systems do not permit us. At Purposeful and with other feminist funders, we've proven that there is actually a model that works and you can move money. If your systems do not permit you, there are systems that are tested. We trust Youth Just Shared. We have Purposeful. We have other intermediary funders who have really worked in participatory and power-centered approach to moving money directly into the hands of girls. We say learn. Yes, by all means do learn, but as you learn, take action. So my mantra has been, we've heard a lot of grace, give funders grace to learn, to understand, but you can actually learn while you do. And because the needs of girls are not waiting for the strategies to be correct, the needs of girls are not waiting for you to tick all the processes within your institutions or for everyone to be convinced, but you can convince people by actually taking resources and investing it into the work of girls and girls organizing globally. The other question is around community accountability. One model that we have really pushed is movement building. It's hard to hold governments to account. It's hard to even hold philanthropy to account. The previous panelist mentioned, how do you even hold your funders to account when you're at risk of your renewal? When you're not sure how much resources will be allocated to your work. So it's hard to do as an individual entity. But one model that is tested, that has worked, is movement strengthening. We have seen how when partners come together with shared value, shared vision, are able to hold governments to account, are able to hold funders to account, and are also able to demand for more and better resources for our collective organizing. One of the models that also worked in Sierra Leone specifically, we had a moment where there was a ban on pregnant girls from going to school. And it's a very challenging because the government, who should be protecting the lives and the rights of girls, first of all, did not put mechanisms in place to ensure that girls understand what sexual reproductive health and rights are, what services should be in the country, until girls were repeatedly raped to the point of getting pregnant. And also decided, oh, the best shot should be, let's get them out of school because apparently pregnancy is a contagious airborne disease. And we came together and said, you have done injustice, first of all, by not being the government that these girls should have looked up to, should look up to. So it's now on you to really correct your system. So we were able to really push that dial when we came together as different organizations, because we're not at risk of, oh, they will close this one office down. We were over 200 organizations. So you will close 200, will any government really close 200 organizations just because we're advocating for the well-being and the rights of girls and young women? I doubt that will be possible. Some of the other models we have also used is ensuring that young people are telling their own stories, because storytelling is a powerful tool. And that has also helped to really shift mindsets, to really extend grace to people who might not really know the harm in some of the practices that they are executing. That has also been another approach that has worked. We have also invested, and we will encourage folks to invest a lot in resource and knowledge building and strengthening. That has also helped to really hold both government and funders accountable, but also donor learning, right? And we trust Youth Shared, Purposeful is doing Power for Girls. There are other organizations who has really tested that donors can learn and they can shift their practices when they know better. And there's room and provisions for all of that. That will be all from me. Thank you so much, Flora.
Thank you so much, Aminata. The one thing I've taken home from is if we are trusting young women and girls to run their families and account for the money that is being spent in their households, then why can't we put the money to actually meet their needs in their hands? So thank you so much for your powerful insights. And we've come to the end of the second panel discussion. A huge thank you to our incredible panelists, Ruth, Esther, and Aminata, for such powerful and an energizing conversation. Today's dialogue has reminded us that shifting power is in the funding structures, and decision-making is not just possible, it's already happening in bold and inspiring ways. And kudos to all the organizations that are doing this. We've had about models that are prioritizing adolescent girls' leadership, the importance of intersectional holistic investments, and the critical need to hold both funders and governments accountable to their promises. As we close this panel, let's take these insights forward, move into our own spaces, advocating for funding approaches that are inclusive, responsive, and led, most importantly, by those who are affected. And now we'll transition over to the Q&A segment, just to hear what folks in our audience have to respond to, and I'll transition it over to Nina.
Thank you, Flora. I hope I am audible. Hello, everybody. My name is Wamboy from Akili Dada. Thank you for staying on. And a hearty thank you to all our panelists for those powerful insights. We'll now move into the Q&A session. We are keen to hear from you, but may not be able to hear from everyone. And so please send your questions to cagsteeringcommittee@gmail.com. I'll repeat, cagsteeringcommittee@gmail.com. And now we have 5 minutes to ask our questions. And thank you, tech team, for also projecting that. I will invite Crispin Kimani to start, just to guide us all through this session. We will have 5 minutes to ask our questions, and then we'll invite the panelists to reply. So please keep your questions brief. So for panel 1, we had Crispin Kimani raise his hand. We also had Beatrice Tanui. Tech team, please support me in spotlighting and unmuting the 2 speakers. Speakers, as you do raise your questions, we request that you please specify which panelist you're keen to respond to you. Thank you. Crispin, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much for the very insightful webinar, and it's refreshing to hear about all these vibrant ideas about how possibly we can be able to fund some of these very impactful projects that actually affect adolescent girls and needs. So mine is just a comment. Because the needs of adolescent girls are very comprehensive. This could span all the way from education, psychosocial support, economic empowerment, rescue from abuse and exploitation, etc. And particularly from where I work at the Center for Domestic Training and Development, CDTD, we end up encountering so many girls who are in forced labor or domestic work situations. So this actually just necessitates that funders should kind of shift to a flexible long-term funding model, which will be able to enable grassroots organizations to support girls effectively. And but I would love also just to commend organizations like the Global Fund for Children, who are some of the speakers here today, because they funded the Center for Domestic Training and Development for over 5 years, and they actually meet grantees at their point of need. And even after the funding cycle, they were able to link us to support. So mine is just to commend you all for the wonderful job that you're doing. It's refreshing to hear about all these initiatives, and just to hope that we can be able to be a part of this conversation as we take it up further in the next few webinars in this series. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Crispin. Thank you for your kind words. And really, this is the start, as was shared earlier. And I'm sure in the closing remarks, you'll get to see what the next steps are, just to also anchor us all on what to look forward to. Checking in on Beatrice, if you're still with us.
Thank you.
Please feel free to unmute.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you for a very interactive webinar. I lead an organization for women in tea, and during our interactions in the tea sector, then you really find that the adolescent girls are really, really suffering. So I just wanted to raise it here so that at least when we are doing interventions for these girls, we also look at the estates, like even the tea estates, the sugarcane, you find they are actually being used. They are sexually abused. They don't go to school. They are used as child labor. So I'm just asking all of us to put our efforts together so that we can really help these girls in the estates where, you know, their parents are plucking tea, their mothers are plucking tea, and they take them along. And at the end of the day, they don't go to school, they don't access sanitary towels, they don't, you know, they are sexually abused. So I was just bringing it up so that for us as organizations also, we need to really put ourselves together despite the challenges of funding, which I know it has really, really affected. But we should be able to look at how can we be innovative enough to make sure that our organization are also sustainable so that we may continuously support these initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Beatrice. I can, okay. Hajati, is that you coming on next with your question?
Hello, hi everyone. Thank you so much. So my name is Hajat Abdul Jamal Uthman. I'm the executive director of an organization called Quack Thrive Youth Empowerment Center that basically works with adolescent girls and young women. And I have two questions. One is to one of the presenters that was from the Girl First Fund, because I think in Uganda, they have, I don't know if it's deliberate, but funding grassroots organizations, basically for us who are in the rural areas, is very hard. And even having access to their funding mechanism. I know they have an in-country consultant. So how they have made the way they make the accessibility of adolescent girls and young women led organizations in the rural areas be able to access their resources and enrich on their on their type of portfolio is really, really hard. So they need to devise means of how do they also fund rural organizations like ours that have started last year, that have not handled a lot of money, that have been there. We're working with very many different people. So it's kind of that context analysis that they're even you can't even understand the application process. So for me, I would love for her to explain to us, Valeria, what is the mechanism they use when it comes to their funding mechanism around adolescent girls and young women? Because I know one organization that they fund, and they've been funding them for the longest period of time, and it's very good. But of rural organizations and your in-country person, so that is something that I really, really wanted to talk about. But also that is the same to purpose. We are purposeful. Intentionally, you find that when it comes to adolescent girls and young women, you don't fund the whole spectrum of diversity. If you're talking about, because there's no way we are reaching you. There's no way we can be able to speak to you. There's no way we can be able to share our reports, our work around adolescent girls, our innovations, our things. So your funding spectrum is really hard to understand. So it's just very hard for us as AGYWs to be able to reach out to you because you have not put the spaces for us to be able to actually reach out. We don't know the portfolio, we don't know the call for proposal, we don't know when, but then we have rural grassroots organizations that are really working. So for me, that is something that really has to work. The other thing is the challenge that now needs to be put on the table. That now that Dreams has gone, I want to hear from UNICEF and all the other, where are these programs now going to be integrated as donors? Where are you going to integrate this programming that has been happening to adolescent girls and young women? We just recently celebrated menstruational hygiene day. But how many girls, just like one of the people asked, we need to find out the questions. Where are we now getting the funds to actually still continue the work that was being done earlier before? Thank you so much, and over to you back. I beg to submit.
Thank you all. Unfortunately, those are the questions we'll be able to take for today, but just to invite the panelists to speak, we will start with the question to Valeria, which was, and just to also acknowledge the issues that have been raised and emphasized on, we've taken note of the same, and also encouraging us all to, if you did wish to speak or share your question, don't forget to please reach out to us and share your questions on cagsteeringcommittee@gmail.com. Now for Valeria, I hope you're still with us. The question for you is on how, could you please share with us the mechanism in which you fund rural upcoming organizations that are focused and especially focus on supporting and working with and for adolescent girls and young women. The second question that you could also reply to is on accessibility. How can we reach you? Then for purposeful, the question is how are you accessible? How do girl allies and girl serving and girl-led organizations access opportunities through you, be able to contact and connect to you? And also there's the question for UNICEF with reference to the current landscape that we're at. Where is the funding coming from? What does the future look like? What should we look forward to? And how can we also consolidate together to navigate such times? Good. I will invite Tashrifa to help me moderate that part as I bid you adieu. Over to you, Tashrifa. As the panelists come to speak, Valeria, you would begin, and then we'd have Purposeful come on next, and a representative from UNICEF to speak to that. And then you could proceed on to the closing remarks. Thank you so much.
Valeria, in case you're speaking, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you so much for your question. The Girls First Fund support community-based organizations, and this include organizations that are in rural zones. One of the general challenge that sometimes we face is that for the organizations to have a legal registration that sometimes is requesting depending on each country. So in some cases, it's needed to have the support of a fiscal sponsor, but the process, the mechanisms is usually that we receive recommendations and we explore and research the organizations and have conversations to identify the alignment of the organization's work with the priorities that we identified. And the person who developed all this connection is the program advisor in each country that is the focal point. So to do all these connections with the organizations. And right now I am not clear about the timeline for renewable or new partners in Uganda, but I will happy to share my contact and connect you with our program advisor in Uganda. So you can go deeper about this information and have more clarity about how is all the process.
Right. Thank you so much. I'll be so glad to receive your email. I don't know how I can be able to get it.
I think that in the chat, if you're able, we can share. I'm not sure, but
I cannot be able to access the chat. My thing is not accessing the chat.
Yeah. Hajani, we've got your email and we can share that with Valeria, and then
thank you so much. I'll be very glad to do it.
Thank you, Valeria. Aminata, yes, come on, welcome.
Ajati, thank you so much for the question. So Purposeful moves money through different vehicles. One of them is the Global Resilience Fund. It's a crisis funding, so both environmental crisis and other types of crisis that young people, highlight. We have advisors who also highlight when crisis moments are on, and we also move money to ensure that we're responding to the needs of girls in those countries and during those crisis moments. We also move through CRIF, the Children's Rights Innovation Fund. And if you check them online, follow our social media pages, we always advertise the call for proposals there because remember, we're also sort of intermediaries. So we fundraise to be able to fund in the ways that we do. And we don't like to raise hopes when we don't have the resources. So we only make commitments when we have resources. We've been advocating for long-term commitments as well from source funders. So whenever we have those opportunities, we advertise a call for proposals. So I really encourage you to follow our social media pages. We have quite accessible ways of applying for our fund and very flexible ways as well. And you can either write applications or do audio recordings. It depends on the call for proposals that is out at that moment. We have the Wheaton for Girls Fund, which is like our consistent ways of moving money to beyond crisis. So a sustainable, continuous community ways of moving money. And yeah, that will be purposeful. And those are the ways we move money. We have our call for proposals, and we really try to have multiple year funding. Yeah, so that will be all, but we'll encourage you to follow our social media pages, www.wearepurposeful.org, or CRIF's social media pages, Children's Rights Innovation Fund, and we always advertise opportunities when they arise.
Right. Thanks so much, Valerie, and thank you so much, Aminata. We've come to the end of our webinar today. I'd like to thank you all for being here and staying with us through such a rich and thought-provoking discussion. Over the last 2 hours, we've heard from an incredible range of voices, from grassroots leaders and youth-led organizations to global funders and multilateral partners. Each speaker brought critical insights to the table, not only on the urgent implication of the US federal funding freeze, but also the possibilities and pathways forward to protect and sustain investments in adolescent girls. We've also had a strong message repeated across the panels. Girls know what they need. Let's fund their ideas, their leadership, and their futures. As for next steps, we will develop and circulate this meeting summary brief, highlighting key discussion points, recommendation, commitments, and action items. We are also planning to have to co-convene in partnership with Akili Dada, a physical follow-up donor roundtable to further explore solutions and opportunities discussed during the roundtable in Nairobi, probably in the month of August. Kindly reach out to us in case you want to co-convene, to participate, or to be part of this session or conversation in any way during the physical meeting in Nairobi. We also plan to develop a knowledge product or briefing note that captures best practices on inclusive, equitable, and sustainable funding for adolescent girls. And then we plan to facilitate co-signing of our joint statements by CAG members and other stakeholders on the need to urgently prioritize sustainable funding for adolescent girls globally. That said, I'm sure you all agree with me that we've had an incredible conversation today. A heartfelt thank you to all our panelists, co-conveners, and the behind-the-scenes technical team who've made this possible. And of course, to every single one of you who joined from around the world. Imagine over 200 people are able to join. Your presence today is a powerful reminder of the energy, commitment, and urgency behind collective action for girls. Thank you for showing up, for speaking up, and for standing with us and with the girls. Bye for now and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.